Tony Blair, first of all, thanks very much for granting us the interview. In your book, in the section about Northern Ireland, probably the statement that's captured the most headlines has been this one about stretching the truth at times beyond breaking point. Any particular examples you can give us of that?
Yeah, hello. You know, it's ever with these things, people somewhat exaggerate. I'm not saying the whole time, you know, you're doing that, but on occasions. And in particular, in 2006, when, frankly, the two sides were very far apart, and I thought the thing might collapse, and I was being asked to pass on a very hard message, so hard that I thought it would tip the other side out of the whole negotiation. I just took the decision not to do that. But, you know, on the whole, incidentally, the negotiation was conducted incredibly transparently. And the one thing about Northern Ireland is that nothing's kept a secret for long. So, you know. So
you wouldn't agree with, say, the Ulster Unionist reaction to that has been that that means the St Andrews Agreement was built on lies?
Come on, guys. No, I saw that with a degree of amusement, and it brought back memories of the exaggerated things people used to say at the time. And incidentally, I'm sure any Northern Ireland politician or any politician knows what I'm talking about, or anybody actually doing any job. You know, I mean, but I'm not saying you're deceiving people the whole time. I'm simply saying you, in a complex negotiation, sometimes, as I say, you know, you've got to take a decision not to disclose something that maybe someone wants you to, but maybe you think, well, that is really going to wreck the process.
So the end justifies the means, does it?
No, because that's far too broad a statement. It's simply that, look, it's a statement of the obvious, and I think normal people who read it in context in the book will be fine with it. I've also tried in the book, though, to be frank about what it's like to be a political leader. I've written this in a completely different style from a normal political memoir. I want it to be read by people who aren't that interested in politics, as well as people who are. And, you know, one of the things we're always asking politicians to be is very open. And then you are open, and everyone said, well, that's terrible. You know, we want you to maintain this sense that, you know, politicians are buttoned up people who aren't human beings, who don't have the same thoughts and same challenges and difficulties as any other human being.
Well, you pepper the book with vignettes about the Northern Ireland politicians that you obviously dealt with. Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness, you say you liked them maybe too much. Why?
Well, I understand from the unionist point of view, and I always did and always said this, it's very hard for them not just to forget, but to forgive. And you know, you understand that, but it's in the nature of somebody coming in from the outside to a process like this that you start to know these people very well, and you become, you know, close to them, and those personal relationships, incidentally, are important in getting the job done. And I see this now, and I was with President Obama in the White House the other evening with the Israeli Prime Minister and President Abbas of the Palestinians, and, you know, the personal relationships that are being forged in the course of the process are incredibly important to achieving peace. And, you know, obviously for either side there's some very brutal and difficult parts of the past, but for the person who's trying to lead the negotiation, you've got to try and move beyond that.
Because Gerry Adams and Martin McGuinness had that personal charisma or rapport with you, were they able to extract anything that the Unionists didn't?
No, because the Unionists extracted plenty as well. I mean, they tend to forget that a bit, but they did. And it was really more that they were leading Sinn Féin from a very hard-line position to a point where we can have today a Northern Ireland peace process that actually echoes right around the world. And that took courage and leadership, as it did from David Trimble and then later Ian Paisley, as it did indeed from the SDLP people, and actually I hope, very generous to all the leaders of the main political parties.
For a long time it seemed Ian Paisley would never do a deal. You yourself referred to it as pie in the sky. Were you surprised that you were eventually able to talk him around?
I was surprised, though as I got to know him better, I realised, you know, the sort of caricature, as often is the case in these circumstances, the caricature was not really the character. So in the end, but I mean, you know, I didn't talk him round really. I mean, he came to the conclusion himself that this was a moment in which if the IRA genuinely gave up violence, then the Unionists genuinely had to share power.
Given that your press officer Alistair Campbell had said you don't do God,
Why did you talk God with Ian Paisley? Was it genuine, or was it a way of getting into his good books?
No, absolutely not. It was, and I describe in the book how I was actually very scrupulous about that, because he's a genuine religious man, and I'm someone of religious faith myself. So it provided, I think, something of a common bond, and he was, very genuine about it.
One character, lesser known on the international scene, but he obviously stuck in your mind, Brendan McKenna, the Garvahi Residents Coalition. You paid tribute to him as almost the champion of unreasonableness.
Well, he was pretty difficult to deal with, but no doubt he thought the same about me. But no, it was... Drumcree was one of these issues, which if you were an outsider, you just sat there and thought, there must be some sensible compromise we can have on this, but it was pretty difficult.
And obviously you pay tribute to all your secretaries of state. In relation to Mo Mowlam, some people felt that she became too popular for her own good. That was one of the reasons why she was removed. I mean,
this is total rubbish. I mean, it really is total rubbish. It's like this story they keep wheeling out that I was embarrassed when she got a standing ovation at the Labour Party conference. We were leading the ovation. I mean, Mo was a fantastic asset for the Labour Party and for the government. She actually wanted to move. The trouble was she wanted to move to a job other than the job I wanted her to move to.
But you did say that in asking for the Foreign Office, she was maybe overestimating her own capacities, didn't you?
Look, Mo was an unusual and an extraordinary person. But I mean, my judgment, and others may have taken a different view, was that the Foreign Secretary job wasn't for her really. But actually, I wanted her to be Health Secretary, which is a pretty big job in a Labour government. So, but it was not. I retained and do retain an immense respect and affection for Mo.
The current system of government we have has its problems. The parties are always squabbling about something or other.
Do you think what you set
up... It's not unknown in other governments, by the way.
Do you think what you set up there is a permanent solution, or is it something temporary that will just last for a short while, must be changed?
No, it is. I mean, no doubt there will be evolutions in the future, but the basic framework of peace, I mean, however, over time, it could be that politics evolves, in a sense, to a more normal set of political positions, but you just can't tell that at the moment. The most important thing is to keep the process intact and going forward, and not let anyone wreck it, because when I'm out in the world now, and for example in the Israeli-Palestinian issue, which I work on now with George Mitchell again, there's no doubt the Northern Ireland situation is a huge symbol of hope and encouragement to millions of people around the world. I mean, sometimes maybe people in Northern Ireland don't quite understand this, but it really is, in virtually every part of the world I go, people want to ask about it and talk about how things are now. We know all the fragilities, but we should just remember what it was like when we used to wake every morning to tales of people dying, and Belfast was in lockdown, and life was pretty difficult and pretty miserable.
Do you think Northern Ireland politicians could play a more active role in the Middle East peace talks, which are currently up and running?
I mean, they've got enough to do in their own politics, I should think. But I think what they do, though, is very often be a reference point, and I know that people go and seek their advice, and these conflict resolution, which I tried to deal with in the book, and very much with the Middle East in parallel to Northern Ireland. I mean, of course, every situation is different, but some of the lessons, I think, can be applied. And one of the most important lessons, incidentally, is never give up.
You say it's important that nobody should wreck the process. What do you make of the threat posed now by dissident Republicans?
I don't believe they will, because I don't believe they have real support. On the other hand, the trouble with this terrorism is that what it does is, if you kill innocent people, you create not just obviously the death of those innocent people, but you create a situation in which you create waves of sectarianism, and that's the purpose of it. That's why it's such a wicked thing to do, really. So obviously we've got to be very vigilant. I mean, I don't believe they represent anything, either here in the Republic or in Northern Ireland, but they will, there are always, I'm afraid, crazy people who want to do crazy things.
We're not going to go over all the details of Iraq, but if you had actually departed office earlier, given that Northern Ireland was early in your premiership, would history have been kinder to you?
There will come a time when people make a somewhat more considered judgment about these foreign policy questions. And actually, interestingly, the debate in America has already moved on. And moved on in the sense that people understand that the reason it's difficult in Iraq is the reason it's difficult in Afghanistan, but you could look at what happened in Pakistan yesterday. Look at what's happening in Somalia today, all over the Middle East. There are these self-same issues, and I think, it's a very, very big issue, this, but we're only at the beginning of dealing with it. And I think there will be one of the reasons when people say to me, what about your legacy and so on, and I always say about the Iraq part, you just can't make a judgment yet.
And the challenges facing Northern Ireland, not just security ones now, in common with the rest of the UK, huge economic challenges. Do you think Northern Ireland's safe in David Cameron's hands right now?
Look, one thing I always decided to do was to not cause trouble for people who sit in the hot seat that I sat in. And I'm sure he is very well intentioned towards Northern Ireland and will do his best for people there. And I mean that, actually. And he doesn't need advice from me to do it.
Tony Blair, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you.